Hello, I'm Kim Miller, Vice President of Programs at RISE, a national nonprofit that educates and empowers the sports community to eliminate racial discrimination, champion social justice, and improve race relations in our country. RISE engages athletes, coaches, and executives across all levels of sport, equipping them with the necessary skills to be leaders for racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. You can learn more about RISE at our website, risetowin.org. At RISE, we believe that athletes, coaches, and others in the sports community are leaders in our society in many ways, including helping to foster and drive more inclusive communities. Today, RISE is partnering with the Principal Charity Classic to discuss how we can grow the game of golf through inclusion. So let's get started and meet our panelists. Joining us today is Marsha Oliver, the Vice President of Community and Inclusion for the PGA Tour. Marsha is responsible for helping lead and support the tour's commitment to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion practices that strengthen and improve communities, its business, and sport. Kirk Triplett is a professional golfer on the PGA Tour Champions. He has 8 PGA Tour Champions victories and 65 top 10 finishes in his career. It's an amazing accomplishment, Kirk. We're also honored to have Teree Caldwell-Johnson with us today. Teree is the president and CEO of Oakridge Neighborhood and Oakridge Neighborhood Services, a benefactor of the Principal Charity Classic that provides safe and affordable housing and supportive human services programming in Des Moines, Iowa. Thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today. We truly appreciate your time and the expertise. We'd like to begin this conversation talking a little about our own experiences. When we talk about issues of race, diversity, and inclusion, it's important that we're open, honest, and frankly, a bit vulnerable. By doing so, we can connect with people on a human level in order to create better understanding around these critical issues. So a question I'll pose to all panelists today is to think about your own personal experiences and what moment or event in your life opened your eyes to issues of racism and injustice. Marsha, we'll begin with you.
Thank you, Kim, and I am honored to be with Teree and Kirk today. So thank you for this opportunity. You know, I've participated in RISE training before, and I recall receiving that question. And it goes back to a time my parents were actually raised during segregation here in the South. And my father was a strong Southern Baptist deacon who believed in challenging any wrongdoing and injustices. And I recall him coming home from the supermarket one day, and he was really upset because someone had taken a parking spot for him. And I said to Mom at that time, I was in my late teenage years, and I said to Mom at that time, how did you guys live during the time of segregation? Like, you know, I'm watching him, like he's challenging every wrongdoing, every, unjust, practice or thing. And she said, oh, very easily. Yeah, we would see water fountains that say, whites only and counters at the lunch counter. And our parents said, hey, if you got to go to the bathroom, you wait till you got home. You're thirsty, you wait until you got home. You're hungry, you wait until you got home. So they lived their lives and found freedom in the choices that they made each and every day. And my siblings and I were raised pretty much the same way. That's how we navigated those spaces. We didn't go where we could potentially be unwelcomed or treated less than. So it was in 1996. I had been selected as part of a group study exchange program that afforded me the opportunity, along with 3 other professionals, to go to South Africa to spend 3 months doing my profession there in that country. And it's an international exchange program. You apply and you're not sure where you're going. And at that time, this was 1996, and apartheid had just ended 2 years earlier. And so I was the only Black person in the group of 4. And we actually stayed in the homes of citizens who lived there in the community. We were part of this nonprofit program. And in those 3 months, we went to various parts of the country. And so one of these stops, I stayed at a bed and breakfast. And I gotta admit, guys, I was excited because I thought, wow, when you're staying in the homes, you're on, you've got to engage in conversations. And I thought, wow, I'm staying at a bed and breakfast. there's a little bit of isolation that I get, a little downtime. And the owner of the bed and breakfast said to me, "You realize why you're here, don't you?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, we could not find anyone who would be willing to host you in their home. They were not comfortable having a Black person in their home." And I remember how that changed my life. It changed my life because it told me that I had been living my life in a way that worked for my parents, but should not have necessarily worked for me. I actually spent my life navigating places where I didn't feel as though I was welcome. And so that said to me, you know what, I have really, not allowed myself to really be involved in courageous conversations about inclusion. And I'll tell you, when I came back to the States, I vowed right then that I would no longer choose to only navigate in those spaces, that I would engage in critical conversations like the ones that RISE hosts. What I learned then is that people, and my parents taught this for a long time. I mean, people see in the world what they carry in their hearts. So how important it is for me to be a part of those conversations, to seek to change those hearts and those beliefs and those attitudes. So I am grateful for the opportunity to be able to share in these conversations where we're talking about inclusion. And the only way to talk about inclusion is actually putting yourselves, having the courage to be able to be a part of that.
Wow, that is, I can imagine, a life-changing experience, and it sounds like it was for you. Thank you very much for sharing that. Teree, how about you? Something that stands out for you?
So first of all, it's great to be on the panel with Kirk and Marsha, and thank you for welcoming me. I'm originally from the great state of Kansas. I'm a child of the 60s. Both my parents were college educated. So unlike many of my contemporaries, I didn't have to deal with the burden of race and class. I only had to deal with the burden of the color of my skin. And it's interesting because as I think back, being a child of the 60s, I really in Kansas didn't have to deal with segregated restrooms or drinking fountains or establishments. But it's really ironic that my dad and my mom actually ended up in my hometown because my father was recruited to be the principal of the segregated school in Salina, Kansas, which is my hometown. So I learned a lot from their experiences, and in so many ways, like Marsha, I was informed by what my parents knew and learned and shared, but I didn't really personally have to deal with so many of the atrocities that our predecessors did. So I'm going to fast forward to 1988. I was moving from San Antonio, Texas to Des Moines, Iowa. I applied for a position here as the executive director of the Solid Waste Authority, which is probably not a kind of job that you would expect an African-American female to be moving into. But my background was local government management, and I felt very equipped to be able to move into this role given my administrative and management acumen. I showed up for the interview. The interview panel was comprised of 3 white males, all of whom were city council members in the respective cities that were members of the Solid Waste Authority. I felt really comfortable going into the interview. I had done my preparation, I had done my homework, I was ready to hit the ground running and respond to all of the professional questions that I thought I was going to get. And along the way, one of the interviewers asked me a question that literally dumbfounded me. And the question was something like this. If we were to hire you for this role, will you hire other people that look like you? And I was shocked. I didn't know if it was a trick question. I didn't know exactly how I was expected to respond. And I could have very easily said, I'm going to hire people based on their qualifications, not based on their race or their gender or anything. But I decided that I needed to take a bit different approach because I needed to speak truth to power at that very moment. And so instead I said, I will not dignify that question with a response, because that is not a question that you would ask of a white male or a white female. I felt empowered at that very moment because I knew that if I succumbed to that kind of pressure then, that there would be pressure to follow that I may or may not have been willing to deal with. So I decided to be bold in that moment. And I decided, quite frankly, I was just gonna, cast all things to the wind and see what happens. Well, I was actually hired for the job, served in that role for 8 years, and hired the most diverse staff that organization had ever seen.
Wow, it takes courage, just like you said, not to give a standard answer, but to, push back a bit, and to do so and still land the job and have the kind of accomplishments that you did. So thank you, Teree, for sharing that. Kirk, when you think back to your personal experiences as well, what opened your eyes to issues of racism and injustice?
Well, my background couldn't be probably any more opposite of Marsha's. I grew up in a small town in the Pacific Northwest, university town, Pullman, and there just literally is no experience with different cultures and different races, and everybody looks the same. I remember going to college and having an English assignment about this very subject. When have you ever experienced, had to write a paper, and I had to go talk to the professor and say, I honestly have never had any experience, right? So that's my upbringing, right? And not that it was one side or the other. It just, there was a total lack of experience. And I really feel like for so many people in golf, right, that's sort of the way it is, and sort of the way it has been. We golf as a sport is just tremendously inexperienced. Now, my wife and I, we have 4 children. The youngest 2 are adopted. Our daughter is Hispanic, and our son is African-American, Asian mix, right? So both of us sort of having that experience growing up, and then adopting children from different cultures and different races, that's sort of where our experience with this has begun. So I guess the thing that really has made me more active or more willing to talk about things was when my son, who's 19 now, but when he got his driver's license, just the idea of talking about what do you do when you get stopped by the police, whether it's parking infraction or speeding or whatever, and just having that conversation with him was very different than that conversation with his older brothers. And that's where it really struck me as, hey, there's some patently unfair things that are going on here, right? I'm not experiencing them firsthand, but all of a sudden I'm explaining to him, like, no, look, when the officer says something, you do it, right? And with the different level of, this is really important, right? It may probably not going to happen to you, but it's really, really important. And that sort of combined with watching some of the stuff that's happened over the last few years, the George Floyd tragedy especially, sort of, caused me to end up putting a Black Lives Matter sticker on my golf bag, and just sort of poking golf or telling golf, hey, look, this you may not think this affects you, but it does. So that's sort of my story and how I have sort of come to be more involved and trying to understand. I'm trying to learn. I don't have a lifetime of experience, right? And I can just imagine the scene of your interview, right, with 3 guys just like me, asking that question and probably thinking that, why is she upset about us asking that question, right? So you perceive the question completely different than the guy that asked it, potentially. And our inability to communicate with each other, and how do we bridge those gaps and understand each other better, and I want to be a part of that.
Thank you, Kirk. That one, sharing such personal stories, but also just what you talked about, like continuing to learn, right? Approaching things with curiosity, wanting to be a part of those solutions. I want to take a moment because I think this came up a little bit as you were talking about some of the challenges that exist in the sport of golf as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion. From your point of view, what are some of those challenges?
Well, I think, probably the number one challenge is the perception of golf, and probably rightly so. Talking to a new friend of mine, we're talking about, how we grew up and what kind of things we did. And he goes, man, and he's just starting to get into golf, and he's in his 50s. And I go, man, I wish I started when I was a kid, but that was the white man's game, man. We didn't play that. That was the white man's game, right? So I never heard it. Well, I guess I know it has that connotation, right? And I get it and I understand it. But when we're inside of golf, we don't think of, I don't think golf thinks of itself that way, that there's courses and anybody can kind of go play. You can't play all the country clubs, right? But there's obviously been a lot of racial issues in golf over the years. Augusta battled it with their membership, and we were in Birmingham a while back, and in 1990 there was a club there, and then they asked if there were any African American members, and the founder of the club said, no, that's just not done around here. And that sort of woke golf up a little bit as to, oh, I can't, I know that attitude's out there, but I can't believe people are still saying that, right? It's 1990, it's 2000, right? Why is this kind of stuff still happening? So I think golf has a great opportunity because it's such a game of exchanging with and sharing when you're out playing. It's just a great chance to learn about the people that you're playing with. And I think golf's biggest challenge probably is you can expose people to the game, but can you provide a path for them to continue in the game? So, and again, we have organizations that work on that kind of stuff, but ultimately it comes down to the people that are playing, right? Are you inviting people that don't look like you to go play golf with you, right? Can we create situations where that happens, right? And
absolutely. And you're giving an example of how does an individual start to make change, right? You have to invite people to have a seat at the table. We talk about from an inclusion standpoint, people need to be included just to even get the process started. Marsha, from your standpoint and leadership role you have at the PGA Tour, are there things that have been implemented over time or things that are going on right now that are helping to foster inclusion in the sport and the communities where you serve?
Sure, Kim. And what's interesting, the theme that I've heard from Kirk and Teree in our conversation is courage. Teree having the courage to speak up, Kirk having the courage to put that sticker on the bag. He said he's kind of like poking golf, as a way to be able to have the courage to engage in those conversations. To your question specifically, today we are recording this session, and it would have been Charlie Sifford's 99th birthday today. Charlie Sifford is the first African American on the PGA Tour, and he was quoted as saying, people call me the Jackie Robinson of golf. I'm not the Jackie Robinson of golf, because when you look at baseball, there are all these young kids who are coming up to play the sport, and in golf we don't have that. And that strikes me, and I think it has also in many ways informed a lot of the work that we at the tour have been doing, well before the George Floyd tragedy and the racial reckoning that our country has undergone. But when I look at the First Tee organization for 23 years, they have been introducing youth to the sport of golf, very much the platform of engaging, minority youth. In the past year, they've taken a look at, the growth of their programs, and they can tout millions of kids who have been reached, introducing them to golf, as well as, using golf to highlight life values and core values. And they'll tell you that, their groups have been growing, but the one group that has not grown at the rate is the African American youth. And so they have put together a very comprehensive plan to be able to ensure that their programs and services are very specific within those communities, whether it's, Title I schools where you've got kids who are 70% of them are on free and reduced lunch, are they're in specific neighborhoods and communities of low socioeconomic status, where they're really introducing and targeting, outreach to be able to help introduce and grow the game. The PGA Tour has had a relationship with the APGA, the Advocates Tour. That relationship has existed, I think it started in 2013, 3 years after the organization was founded. In 2010, APGA was created as a way to introduce and bring greater diversity to the game of professional golf. We have strengthened our relationship with them in the past year, increased our financial support, access to our courses or tournaments. We also have, as part of our PGA Tour University, launched an initiative where we identify the top 5 Black collegiate players who have met their eligibility to put them onto the Advocates Tour, provide them with a scholarship and stipend to go on to our Korn Ferry qualifying, which is our elite preparatory tour. So being very intentional about those opportunities for engagement. And as I said before, in 2014, we adopted a strategic plan around DE&I. We were so focused on how we were making our organization, our operations, and our practices better, that we felt that in turn would also help our sport. But we realized we needed to be much more intentional, much more deliberate, much more robust about the very targeted efforts that we're seeking to do to really, really grow the sport. And it has been, I think, an incredible year this past year, as Kirk said, taking the opportunity to learn, finding ways to be more direct. We could sit here and say, hey, let's just write a check to an historically Black college or university, and that'll grow the game. But when you look at HBCUs, you'll see many of the golfers are not even African American. So how can we help and provide support to those universities where we can help them build quality golf programs that students of color want to go? They can be competitive, that they can go on and turn to be able to be successful and have the wins like Kirk Triplett, as you talked about. So, it's just continuing to be very deliberate and intentional and educated about those efforts in order to ensure that they're making the impact.
Thank you. It sounds like that multi-pronged approach is so critical. And I think that's to address any issue that we have. It takes that, right? It takes some creativity, it takes persistence, but it's not just one singular path to change. Teree, I want to bring things back to you and talk specifically about the local community there that you're serving in Iowa. First part of this question is, what are some of the equity and inclusion challenges that exist there locally? And how can organizations like the PGA Tour, Principal Charity Classic, help you as the leader of your organization to address those?
Sure, and that's such a great question because, as everyone knows, if nothing else, 2020 really helped us to be clear about what 2020 vision needs to look like moving forward. And one thing that I would offer is that when we were approached to partner with the Principal Charity Classic, we were thrilled because it was the first time in the history of that event that a minority-led organization was being approached to participate in any way beyond possibly attending the event. So the fact that there was a willingness and an understanding that investing in communities of color was a critical way for the PGA and the Principal Charity Classic to create sort of this relationship within communities, I think speaks volumes about sort of the opportunity that exists for us moving forward. We're thrilled that we were able to partner to focus very specifically on youth development around employment opportunities. For us, we know that the opportunity to cultivate students young, to create sort of this pathway and this synergy and understanding about the connection between academic achievement and employability is sort of that nexus that everyone needs to understand, but more importantly, things that we need to invest in, especially for students in communities of color. I actually today am representing the Oakridge organization, but the larger organization that is part of the effort that the Principal Charity Classic is investing in is called the Directors Council. And the Directors Council is comprised of executive directors and CEOs who are individuals of color leading for-profit and nonprofit organizations right here in Des Moines. We've been together for about 25 years, and together we have created wonderful opportunities for our community to not only understand the needs of communities of color, but to create opportunities for those same individuals to invest back into communities of color. We've been involved in a project called One Economy, Building Opportunity for All, that's focused on the racial wealth gap. We have been deep in this work for about 6 years, and we created a first of its kind report called the State of Black Polk County that began to help people understand the disproportionate impact that race was having, especially on individuals of African descent right here in Des Moines. We followed that up with a 2020 report, which was our blueprint for action that established a number of very specific strategies, indicators, and goals that together with our community could allow us to move the needle for communities of color. And the Principal Charity Classic came right alongside of us to help us to create opportunities for summer youth employment for over 1,200 youth between now and 2023 to be able to not only seek those opportunities, but to prepare for college, career, and beyond. So we're really proud of the opportunity that's been presented to us, but we know that there is so much work that needs to be done. But we're happy to go alongside the PGA and the Principal Charity Classic to invest in that work and to do that work. It's important work and work that needs to be done today.
Wow, that's tremendous. You talk about jobs, you know, just the skill building that comes with that and the lifelong lessons, right? It's not about a single point in time. It's about, you know, someone's overall lifetime and the contributions they can make to their community, and seeing those good examples from you and others, and seeing people from the PGA Tour or the Principal Charity Classic is great. I'll pause here just to see if there's anything else you wanted to add in here, Kirk or Marsha, before we go on to the next question.
I'll jump in. So this to me is like what professional golf is all about, right? It's we have these tournaments, we bring people out to watch the golf, we create a financial engine that a group or a community uses to make their community a better place. And this is why when I tell people, you know, golf has so much potential in this space, in this social justice. It can do so much and provide so much because you can open people's eyes, you can provide money for programs, and you can hand it over to the people that know what they're doing, you know, like Teree, and you can make some progress in your community. So as a golfer, yeah, I love to play well. I like to win tournaments, you know, I like to win prize money, but also knowing that it's part of a bigger mission, that's a great thing to be a part of. And that's, you know, the PGA Tour story. And we try and tell it, but I don't think we do as good of a job as we could.
And I don't think anyone can tell the story better than Teree Caldwell-Johnson too. I mean, what I loved hearing Teree say is that we were alongside her. Like, that's the word you chose. You chose the word alongside. You didn't say, hey, you know, you dragged us so we were ahead of you. You know, we were along, and that's so much of what we seek to do. And as Kirk said, our charitable platform. I mean, we have, as part of our organization, generated $3 billion in charity since our inception. But having the opportunity to take a chance and a greater chance to be able to build an understanding, like, you know, not just saying, hey, here's where the dollars, you know, are going. How can we take the time to build an understanding of what a community needs are? Are there food deserts? You know, how can we, you know, provide support of that? You talk about economic mobility and the one economy. I wrote that down, Teree. You know, state of Black Polk County, you know, providing transportation where children may not have the capacity to get to doctor's appointments, you know, health disparities, educational inequities, all of those things that are important to community. And we live there. I mean, our tournament host organizations, that's where we live, we work, we raise our families, and we care about the community. So taking the time to be alongside you, you know, that's the part that just really gets me really excited to say It's not about, us just saying, hey, we're just here for the tournament for 1 week a year. No, we live there, and we want to be able to contribute and help meet the goals and objectives like the Directors Council and leaders like your organization are taking a part in.
And when you talk about just these longer term commitments, we also over time have learned that the Principal Charity Classic does a lot of work with the First Tee of Central Iowa. Rise loves partnering with the First Tee. We're bringing our multi-week leadership program to the First Tee in Iowa. This is a program that helps to equip athletes, coaches, and other staff in the sports industry to be these leaders in addressing matters of racism, prejudice, and diversity. And so love to hear more about why that First Tee work, in addition to other things that you're doing in the community, is so important.
Yeah, I'll go back to last September. Our commissioner, and we want to talk about courage. When the George Floyd tragedy happened, the very first thing our commissioner did was send an email to the PGA Tour employees and said, we want to be a part of the solution. We want to learn, we want to hear, we want to find out ways in which we can ensure the communities where we go in and week out are improving or not suffering, and what are the contributions that we can make in order to be able to address those inequities and gaps and disparities that our entire country witnessed last spring. And so he raised his hand and said, we're going to designate and commit $100 million over 10 years specific to nonprofit organizations in the communities where we play, who are advancing those efforts, who are addressing those inequities when it comes to youth development, education, health and wellness, economic empowerment, racial equity, and social justice reform. And that's important to us. I mean, Kirk said, people don't know it, but the way in which we operate to be good stewards in the communities where we play. And as a result of that, how can we ensure that each of those 5 areas that I talked about, when we are specifically looking at health and wellness as a category, what are some challenges that exist within that health equity space? Is it, what are the challenges in Des Moines, Iowa, within that space that we as the Principal Charity Classic can be a part of and a contributor to? And so the approach that we've taken is we want to build greater partnerships and deeper engagement with those communities. Where there's First Tee, absolutely. I talked a little bit about that previously, about introducing, golf to students and how that is a pipeline to ensure that we are growing greater awareness and diversity within the sport that we play. But also, how are we improving the communities? How are we ensuring economic mobility and empowerment in small businesses? Ways in which we can address infant mortality rates that, that may be, highly disparate in certain communities. I mentioned food deserts earlier. All of those elements that are so important for us as we seek to be good community stewards. Do we know our community, and committing to doing the work to work alongside, taking Teree's word, alongside organizations who are leaders in this space and contributing and being supportive.
I think it's so important in this context to recognize that for so many people, especially communities of color, the choices we make are shaped by the choices we have. And when I think about golf and I think about communities of color, I think about the fact that, golf courses aren't typically located in urban neighborhoods and urban communities. And so just this notion of access to the sport, access to people who play the sport, access to mentors who can create opportunities for you to engage in the sport are sometimes missing, especially for our African American youth. And I think the thing that's really important about First Tee is the fact that they are going into those communities. They are creating those spaces and those opportunities for those students to indeed have that choice. The choice that may not be available immediately in their community, but access to choices that are available in other communities. And I think it's so important that we lift up work that the First Tee or other organizations like this are doing, because it's really about access and creating opportunities for access and engagement and involvement that can create lifelong opportunities for a sport that for many people, they may not have even known about, but can play for the rest of their life. And that's the thing that I love about First Tee, and the thing that I love about the notion of investing back into communities of color. It is so critical, more critical now than ever.
Thank you so much, Teree. That investing truly in the communities of color, looking at a broad range of needs and I would say root causes to what some of the challenges are, right? So we can stop the cycle that we are seeing experienced in so many different cities across the country, cities, small towns, it's really across the board. We want to wrap up by thinking about, what are some of those tangible next steps? I think, Teree, you may have hit on several of them just as you were talking, but I want to start with you and we'll work our way around. Is there any other just kind of last thoughts as you speak to our audience is what steps can someone take to make inclusion a priority in their lives?
Yeah, I think Kirk hit on this a little earlier about exposing yourself to things that sometimes are uncomfortable, but pushing your own personal boundaries, beyond those things that to things that may be unknown to you, but require courage and moving into spaces where you can engage in those important conversations that not only enlighten you, but create opportunities for people to really begin to learn one from the other. I think the other thing, and I'm just going to put this out there, I don't mean to create sort of any drama, but I do think that we have to be intentional about our efforts. And we've got to get rid of the air of privilege that sometimes surrounds certain spaces. I think there is an air of privilege that sometimes surrounds golf. And I think our ability to not only understand what that privilege is, but how to deal with it and expand our boundaries so we sort of get rid of that, we dispense with it, is really what we need to be about moving forward.
Thank you so much, Teree. That's great advice. Kirk, I want to come to you next because you have shared some things that you've done that to be very intentional. So any final thoughts or advice as you think about others making inclusion a priority?
Well, I think that's right. And I think what Teree was saying about the era of privilege, right? It's really hard to see that when you're like, it's hard to see the mountain when you're on the mountain, right? When you're within golf, you're in there, so you don't see the privilege, right? You don't have the right perspective. And I think so often in golf, we create these programs, and even the first tee does this a little bit of, hey, you come and you just do things our way and things are going to be great. You can come out, and you can play our course and you can participate, and then you can go on your way, right? So, and I don't think golf does as good a job as it could of going out into the community, right? And going and playing at these other golf courses instead of the really nice country club, or participating and meeting those people where they're at, and making, as Teree pointed out, many African American communities, they don't have a golf course nearby, right? There aren't facilities out there. And I know that was one of the original goals of the first tee, was to build facilities. And it very quickly changed into, well, let's use existing facilities and just really focus on the programming and not so much on the facility. And that may be a little piece that's been lost in the first tee. And that be one of the reasons that they're not getting the penetration that they want in certain, demographics. So I think going forward, I think golf should look to go out into the community more, and participate at the public courses, or build some smaller facilities. We're already proving that golf can exist in a lot of different forms. It doesn't have to be 250 acres, a big clubhouse, a swimming pool, 2 tennis courts, right, and all this stuff. It can be on a 10-acre plot with a bunch of short holes, and just a small building, and the experience is the same, right? It's sharing a group of people, sharing the experience of going around the course. I mean, Topgolf has been tremendously successful in this sort of space. I want to point out a project that I just heard about that Mark Rolfing, the golf announcer, is involved in up on the south side of Chicago, where they integrate an older golf course into redoing a community, rehabilitating a community. And I think if we can look at doing some things like that, where then golf becomes part of life, right? And the access is, oh, what are you doing? Well, I'm walking over after school. I'm walking over. I'm going to play with people. right? Instead of this big hullabaloo of, all right, well, I'm going to get picked up by the bus and taken to the country club and hit a few balls. And so I think that aspect of golf says, yeah, we're wide open, just come on over, right? Instead of, yeah, we'll come find you, we'll come get you, and we'll come. I think there's things that golf can do in that direction. We can do a better job.
Yeah, that's awesome. And bringing it right to the community, right to the people versus saying, hey, you got to take those steps. We're taking the steps towards you. So that's great advice, Kirk. Marsha, finishing up with you.
Sure. Teree mentioned access. I say access, costs, and customs. Those have been some of the barriers that have impeded the ability for golf to be, deemed a much more inclusive sport. And we are taking the steps and having leaders like Kirk and community advocates like Teree as well will certainly change that. Kirk mentioned something earlier about the invitation, being invited to play the game. And our marketing team has put together a robust effort with PGA of America and a few others, and it's titled Make Golf Your Thing. And it's designed specifically to say golf doesn't have to be a country club. Golf doesn't have to be coming out to, a stadium course and playing 18 rounds. How can we make sure that we eliminate those perceptions and those barriers, and extending an invite to say, come play with me? And it may very well be at Topgolf, which I perform much better at Topgolf than I do on any course. But in making it more accessible, ensuring that when we're talking about golf, we're not talking about golf on golf stations. Like, how are we making sure that we're talking about golf in all communities and in all areas in which we want to say we look to attract and retain, and developing partnerships with others and leaders of organizations to be able to make golf relevant in all communities. So I'm thrilled for the opportunity to learn today. And our goal is to learn every single day, and being able to do it with leaders like the ones we have on this panel has really been a treat for me.
Thank you. It has been a treat for me as well. I love hearing a panel that's sharing ideas, that's forward-looking. We talked about some of the challenges, but ways that you can address them, ways that you already are addressing them, and things we can all do now. So just again, thank you all for joining us for this RISE Critical Conversation, sharing your insight, your experiences, and what can be done to grow the game of golf through inclusion. And I think we can all just leverage our platforms and our privilege, right? We have varying degrees of privilege to advance diversity, equity, inclusion across communities. For those of you that want to learn more and become leaders for inclusion in your communities, visit our website, risetowin.org. And thank you again for joining us today.